Pastor Casey is going to come now and lead us in a time of recognition of the past pastors, former pastors, and the pastoral history of the church. Pastor Casey, come with me.
If I might, I want to give just a bit of background. There's no way that I suppose that any of us can imagine what life was like in this community or any other community in 1912. But we know it was like a different world compared to our world today. Polly, if I count correctly, you're only about 1 year younger than this congregation. And she might be able to recall some of those childhood images that she has, but we cannot. I've made a few notes just to help us to orient ourselves. Adornment was so different. In fact, I want to read a portion of Scripture that became almost the criteria for dress back in that time. It's recorded in 1 Timothy 2 and 8 through 10. I will, therefore, that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. In like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with braided hair, or gold, or pearls, or costly array, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works. The Church of God was born out of the holiness awakening of the mid-19th century. And D.S. Warner brought together the truth about one church and holiness and free salvation for one all that formed the basic impetus for the message that caused people to come out of denominations. The climate in which the church was born was very conservative by our standards. And the soil in which this church was planted in that soil of, we would call, extreme conservatism. It was not only very conservative and plain in dress, but there was no jewelry, no makeup. Women did not wear any kind of refinements to enhance their appearance. In fact, I was steeped in this teaching, and when Nancy and I were preparing to get married, we really wrestled over whether to get wedding rings. Finally, we settled on getting her one. I did not get one. It wasn't until 1962 I was teaching, and that fall, a young teacher fresh out of college came, and in the lunchroom she began looking at my left hand, and there was no ring. And I had a wife and 2 children at home, and I decided then that I'd better start sending a message. So I still wear my ring, even though Nancy's been gone 6 months. The holiness movement, unfortunately, legalized the adornment and outward appearance. It was intended to reflect the inward holiness of the heart, but it flip-flopped, and so the holiness movement, by and large, used this as a rule of thumb to gauge people's spirituality of how they dressed. And so if you didn't dress right, you were not holy. And a judgmental spirit crept in, and many people were hurt by that critical, judgmental spirit. And that is not the spirit of the Word. The church was also anti-denominational. It was anti-organizational. It was anti-world. And interestingly enough, there were no reverends. And the Church of God, except in very isolated areas, was very opposed to any kind of titles in the church that reflected denominationalism. There were no deacons, except in a few cases, but the ministers were often called elders. After that passage in James where it says, if anyone is sick, let them call for the elders of the church and pray over them. That meant the ministers. I'm dressed as closely as my wardrobe will enable me, dressed like the ministers that would have dressed 1912 to 1920. If you look on pages 46 and 48 in Volume 1 of the history, you'll see a picture of Brother Joe Harold. His great-grandson is here. Is here. Grandfather. And on page 48 is a picture of ministers, and I didn't see a necktie. The necktie created the second most painful crisis in the Church of God movement. And there is a body of people based in Guthrie, Oklahoma, that split off at that time over the necktie crisis, and they're still functioning and ministering today. Coffee was another one. And so there have been crises that have come in the church's history. Brother Turner is pictured in the history book with a necktie on. I think that picture was taken later. I don't know if he wore one in 1930 when he came. Probably not, because the split came in the 30s. But anyway, I wanted to give you an idea that from where we come. Now to our theme for the moment. I have several individuals who are going to be coming to the pulpit and sharing stories. Actually, there were 16 called pastors, including Pastor Darrell, the present pastor. And but in a sense, after writing this, I asked Gary, I think we ought to do something else. His father is really looked upon as the primary or original shepherd of the flock. That was what he was called, at least in the material that we were given. David F. Waddell. And as the stories progress, they will start with, Gary, you are prepared. Where are you, Gary? You are prepared to say something about your grandfather. And then he's going to take Joe Harold and James I. Turner. By the way, if you pick up one of these sheets on the table in the narthex, there's a correction. Brother Hooton's wife's name was Osie Jane, not Josie Jane. And so that correction you make on your sheet if you get one of those. So the stories will be interesting. They will be informative, and they may be emotional. But for the next probably hour, let us hear the stories of the pastors that God sent to pastor this congregation. Gary, you're first.
David F. Waddell, however, not being a pastor, was instrumental in the development and the continuation of the Church of God in southern Greene County. William Nelson Odell embraced the message of the Church of God, and he shared it with my grandfather David and Joe Cornwell as they worked at a sawmill in North Carolina. And these two young men were very motivated to establish a church and adhere to the truths that William Nelson Odell had shared with them. And it's quite certain that they chose to go against the prevailing religious opinions in their community. Before Broyles Chapel was established, groups would meet in the homes of David and Frances Waddell, my grandmother and grandfather. They would also meet in the homes of Joe and Laura Cornwell and many others around the community. During the times when the church was without leadership, my grandfather would hold the flock together with his shepherding spirit, and his home became a hotel for visiting preachers. My dad has often told me that when he woke up in the morning and got up, he never knew who was going to be there. He said as long as he could remember, there were always pastors staying at their house. Next we come to Joe Harold. and his wife, Lizzie. They came from Kingsport, Tennessee to serve as the first full-time pastoral family of the church. And Brother Harold's coming coincided in time with the construction of the original chapel. Brother Harold was getting up in years when he came to Cedar Creek, but his age didn't hinder him from evangelizing, holding tent meetings in the community. One tent meeting was held just not far down the road here towards Cedar Creek on the left-hand side. Surely they could hear all over the community the songs echoing from the tent. Back to the blessed, O Bible, saints of Jehovah rejoice. Jesus is calling his people back to the land of their choice. Following Preacher Harold's tenure as pastor, the church went for a few years under the care of visiting preachers. And it's worthy to state that following the death of Joe Harold and the death of my grandmother, Frances Waddell, that my grandfather married your grandmother. And we're very honored this morning to have Jack with us today. Jack, would you stand and let you be recognized, please? Jack Harold. And even after Granddad and Lizzie were married, it was still a hotel for pastors in their home. They continue that on and on. In 1930, or somewhere thereabouts, there came a man by the name of James I. Turner and his wife Maud. They came from Del Rio, or Slabtown as he called it, to pastor the congregation. Brother Turner was affectionately known and had an amusing personality and a humorous nature. Even the glimmer in his eyes and the mellow lines on his face would cause a person to chuckle. As he would talk or preach, listeners could not help but smile or laugh. He had an amusing way of speaking his message. I don't remember him as a pastor, but I remember him as a returning, visiting pastor who would have lunch with us after church on Sunday mornings several times. But on one day that was held in his honor in August of 1973, Brother Turner shared some colorful incidents that occurred during his pastorate at Broyles Chapel. You know, during his tenure here, we're going through the Great Depression. Life was hard. Money was scarce. He said we'd pass the hat, and sometimes there wouldn't be anything in the hat. We may as well not have passed the hat at all. He also told about a wedding of Polly and Worley Solomon. According to the story, which is often repeated by Polly, the wedding took place at the intersection of Cedar Creek Road and the Preacher's Lane. And to give you an idea, it's this corner of our property right here. Cedar Creek Road and the Preacher's Lane went down the back side of our property to the Moss house where he lived. But they met in the road here. Worley and Polly, along with Perman and Beatrice Cutchaw, met with Brother Turner, where he read the wedding ceremony and pronounced them man and wife. When it was all done, Worley asked Brother Turner how much he owed him. And Brother Turner said, "Whatever you think she's worth." So Worley reached in his pocket and pulled out a quarter. And at that time, a quarter was referred to as 2 bits. From that time on, Polly was known as the 2-bit. James I. Turner was lovable and dearly loved. When he prayed, it's as if he was talking with heaven itself. He was genuine. He was down to earth. He left the mark of God on those he served. It was a sad day when Brother and Sister Turner and their children left Cedar Creek in 1932 to become the first pastors of the Church of God in Greenville.
Shirley and Faye, are you here? Would you come? And Creighton, Arlen, would you all come on up with them? By the way, I'm wondering if we can just interrupt here a moment and get some pictures of the different ones. Would you operate my camera, Lynn? And Gary, would you and Jack, your wife? Jack's wife is the daughter of Roy Sauls. How many remember Roy Sauls?
Single face.
Right. Would you folks come up for a picture, and we stand over here outside while they... Gary, would you come and let... Tricia's going to take your picture there. If we don't do it now, we won't get it later, I'm sure. Just take they're going to be behind the pulpit. Just come on up to the pulpit with her. She's going to. So this might be a preacher now. Thank you very much. Fulton King from North Carolina with his wife Clarissa came to pastor the Broyles Chapel Church of God in 1933. We understand they actually were here on two occasions. I think maybe there was just a small separation in time. With me today is Shirley Williams and Faye Ray. You were nieces.
We were.
And they live, Shirley lives in Flag Pond, and Faye, you live over in Shelton Laurel, and Crate, Shelton, a good brother, and Arlen are kind of descended down the family line from the Kings. Shirley, is there anything about your uncle that you remember that you would like to share?
I do. Greetings in the name of the Lord this morning from my house to yours. And if you are Christ's servant, you live in his house. There were 10 children in the King family. And my grandfather didn't believe in God at all. He would not acknowledge that there's a God, and never did, to my knowledge. But my grandmother was a God-serving woman, and he would whip her when she went to church. She had 10 children, and she went anyway and took them. Every one were Christians. I mean, church-going, truly Christian men and women, but one, to my knowledge, and that was the youngest one. And if she ever professed, I do not know it, but my grandmother lived a life before her children that they all were Christians, and it was wonderful. And there were 5 girls and 5 boys. Fulton was the third one down the row. And he was a wonderful, wonderful man. If any of the nieces or nephews were in the hospital out here, he always came. And it's a little minuet, I guess you would say, in the middle. My aunt's husband died and left her with 3 children. He would come over on Sunday afternoon, and I'm sure it was hard on him because he had a family also. And he would bring her chicken and vegetables and things of that sort to let you know what kind of man he was. And he would say, well, I only eat cornbread and milk. At the time, generally, my cousin didn't know what he was doing, but now she does. He wanted them to have the food. And that's the kind of man he was. And he was the most giving man that I have ever knew in my life. Him and my uncle was about alike. They would give you the shirt off their back, and my father has done that. And I thank you all, and Uncle Fullen was a wonderful, wonderful man of God.
Shirley,
Yes.
just a moment. Tragedy struck his family
times.
while they were here.
2 times.
Can you relate that?
Well, I was too little to remember. I remember them coming to our home, but I wasn't with 7 or 6, something like that, the first time it happened. So I really don't remember. I just remember them being there, and other than that, I don't remember.
But I understand that they lived over on where we call it Garrett Hill Road now, close to where Ivan Collins lives, and their house burned twice. Burned them out while they were pastor there. How many children did Fullen and Clearson have?
He had 6.
6 children. Okay.
4 girls and 2 boys.
And those were really in the days of the continuing depression. It was tough times.
It was.
Could we have our picture with Faye and Clay and Arlen? Would you come up or a little closer? Come on around to Arlen. Run in front by your brother there. We want to get a good picture. Okay, there's one more. You ready? Maybe these will go in the next history book. Thank you very much. After Brother King's ministry, Brother O.D. Bailey and his wife Anita and their children came to pastor the church along about 1941. From the picture you can see they have 4 children there in the picture. Brother Bailey was a precious man that I remember very well. He lived out his years in Chattanooga business and also faithfully served in the Chattanooga church. Brother Bailey was a strong, powerful preacher. He was one of those that drew the line, and there was no mistaking where that line was and what was on one side and what was on the other. That kind of impressed himself on people as him being a little bit rigid, very stern, and some people didn't relate to that style real well. But Brother Bailey laid down the truth as firmly and as clearly as he knew how. They are part of the heritage of the church. So far as I know, do we have any of his descendants with us this morning? Okay, George B. King is another one who came following Brother Bailey, and you have their picture there. They came from Alabama, and for some reason or other, we have not been able to discover Sister King's name. So if anyone knows it, please help us out. We were unable to get that. Brother King was dearly loved. He made a deep impact in this community, and his ministry helped to establish the church to grow stronger. And an incident told by Brother Melvin Shelton Jr. that occurred during Brother King's ministry happened when Brother Jr. and Hazel and their little son Jimmy were living here in Cedar Creek. One day, Jimmy, and this involves the story of Jack Shelton, the itinerant preacher that often came through the country preaching the Church of God message even before 1922 when it was a house church and afterwards. Brother Junior tells about one day Jimmy came down deathly sick. He was just a small boy, and he could not keep anything on his stomach. He was running a high fever. Finally, he lay helpless on his bed, and they didn't know what to do. Toward evening, there came